Hey, what's happening, everybody? This is Tarafdar back with a brand new video. It's been a while. We haven't communicated here. I haven't posted a video possibly around 2 weeks now, and I definitely missed the spot. I wanted to give you guys some education for a long time now. Truthfully, in the past couple of weeks, I've been busy. I've been working on a couple of things, starting my new agency, staffing, that is. We're launched a healthcare staffing agency as well as technology staffing, and that's been taking up a little bit of my time since we discussed the idea of choosing a business partner, and during those incidents I had selected somebody, but unfortunately things didn't work out, and it kind of gave me the bigger piece of the pie, so I don't mind at all. Now this conversation today is going to be very important because it's not only critical for you as an individual when you're looking at increasing your value as an individual, your shares or whatever you have an asset, but at the ultimate end, what you want to do is you want to utilize that, grow, help your family, help yourself, and get into business, in whatever possible way you get into business. You have the power and you have the control. So let's discuss the importance of understanding your net worth. Okay. Your net worth is essentially the key to growth. It's the key to the residual income or the passive income that you want to make. It's the key that will eliminate any type of debt obligations that you have, both short or long term. And it's also a critical key to transitioning your wealth to your family. So if you don't understand your net worth, you'll be in a position to always kind of constantly live in an uncertain way. Essentially meaning you don't have assets to fall back on. If you lose a job, you don't have assets to fall back on. If something happens, something critical to you that, God forbid, can no longer help you, or let's say give you the ability to go out there and earn for yourself and your family. And if that were to happen, where would you be today? And that is why it's important to understand your net worth, because that is the key to moving ahead in any level of way and concept financially. So I want to break down this presentation for you, and I'm going to reveal certain things that is untraditional. It's avant-garde, right? It's not something that's discussed with the traditional gentlemen's and women's who sit down with you to discuss the financial planning aspect, because those are standardized processes. Most of them serve institutions, whether it be they're working for a bank, an insurance company. They have an agenda, and that agenda is to help make you understand the importance of their product or services. Where in this presentation, my goal is to give you the understanding of understanding what net worth is, and for you to make the conscious decision of choosing the product that best fits your criteria, because everybody's different. Even though there is a heavy level of marketing, advertising, billboards, television ads, radio on what product should be good for you, at the end of the day, the decision is still yours. And unless you understand how to calculate and the value of what net worth is, there's no way that you'll kind of see it beyond the advertising message. And that's my goal for you today. First thing we're going to do is you have to understand, if you're building wealth, your net worth is key. Because wealth is essentially a cumulative of your net worth minus your debts, right? So that's what's important for you to understand. Because the importance of understanding your net worth essentially translates into how you build your wealth, what directions you make, where do you take your business, what kind of financially conscious decisions you make on a personal level, with debt, with purchasing assets, with let's say, with your liabilities that you may have, right? And how does that impact you and your family ultimately? Because you making a financial decision today is going to impact your family short and long term, regardless whether we like it or not, because we're in the same household. So we have to make that decision. And then we're going to also discuss the strategies that you can enhance and add to your bottom line, which is your profits, to your worth, by eliminating certain uncertainties. Because that's the key as well. Because if you don't understand some of these very basic concepts, what's going to happen is you're going to get stuck. A lot of people are going to push their products and services, yeah, but you won't have the basic knowledge and the know-how to execute a proper calculation to understand your net worth. And you're going to see what I'm talking about. But the key is, of course, understanding your net worth, right? So here are some statistics and some of the facts, right? So did you know that the average American only has about $3,000 in their bank accounts in their lifetime? And I'm not talking about, like, you know, um, one account. I'm talking the average of all accounts. And that's pretty dangerous. And another problem is, a lot of people, to calculate their net worth, that's a far-fetched idea. They don't even think about it. Okay. And this is a real hard fact that's going to be disturbing, but we know for a fact that we may have been, down that road at some point. Some of you may still be in that road right now, right? Many live paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes they even go into their debts to survive. Like they don't have income. They literally borrow from lines of credit cards, whatever it is, just to survive because they may have some cushion there in terms of credit, but what ends up happening is it catches on. And eventually it just hits so hard, it's almost impossible to get out of. So it's important. When you take your time to understand and calculate your net worth, you're going to start seeing some of the risks that you're exposed to, both on a personal and financial level. Now, is it not worth it to understand that at a high level? Because if you do, you'll have a conscious way of looking at things. You'll say, okay, you know what? Maybe that wasn't the right thing for me. Maybe borrowing this debt wasn't the right thing for me. Now, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I'm here to educate you on what you need to know. Once you know that, the level of decisions that you make is on you. But at least I've done my job. And at the end of the day, trust me, after you know what's there, you'll be happy you learned it today. So the biggest thing in understanding your net worth as an individual is the assets, right? These are the things that will define how much you're worth ultimately, minus everything else. They're the cornerstone, and we have to start with that. So it all starts with assets. Now let's look at some of the things that we can qualify as assets, right? We're not talking liabilities. So this is just on a general scope, at a 10,000 feet overview of what assets are. So money in your bank account, that's asset, right? Like the $3,000 we talked about. Value of your investment accounts, depending, you might be investing in stocks, bonds, private companies, not sure. I mean, those at the higher level things, but whatever you have out there, it's considered an investment account. Now, for most of you guys, you can still have like 401ks, IRAs, certain situations like that still counts. Your car, depends if it's paid or not, that's an asset. And a lot of people say, well, cars are not an asset. Technically speaking, if you really needed liquidity and your car was free and clear and you sold it, you would get some cash value for it. Therefore, it is an asset. The market value of your home, all right? And we're not talking about liability, so there's no mortgage calculations in this element, but whatever you're living, if you've got equity, if you sold it, there's something there, but that's an asset. Your business interests. And we talked about some of the things that you have, shares in. If you have partnerships, if you have businesses that use a more brick and mortar type of situation, those are considered business interests, right? So that can be considered an asset because you can technically go out there and either borrow against that, or you can technically sell your business shares, of course, with the proper compliance channels through the SEC. But if you were to sell it, you would essentially convert it into a certain dollar amount, right? And of course, if you have certain things like collectible goods and paintings and art and certain things like that that appreciate over time, classical cars, some examples. I know some of the wealthy, high net worth individuals out there actually have that going on for them. So those are some of the things that we can just simply say are assets, right? Now, if you were looking at assets, and then of course you have debt obligations that come with those assets, like if you have a home, you have a mortgage. If you take your liabilities and you subtract that, that's what's going to happen, right? So you have liabilities which are essentially, they eat away from your wealth. They're essentially a part of getting ahead, but they eat away from your wealth. And what I mean by getting ahead is you need a mortgage to get into a home that you cannot afford right away with cash. But ultimately what happens is over the years, as you're paying it down, your appreciation of the property goes up and your obligation, which is your liability, goes down, increasing your assets value, your equity, right? So let's look at some of the things that may be considered liabilities. All right, you have your mortgages, which are your primary homes, or sometimes income-producing real estate. If you have investment property out there, your business expenses. If you have business interest, you have expenses, and all these type of things are considered liabilities. Your credit cards, right? The regular amount of debts that you have on a day-to-day basis would be considered a liability. And if these are high interest rates, right, because they're unsecured, so that means that you're paying a lot more than you would pay in a traditional collateralized loan like a mortgage, right? You have your personal business debts. Unfortunately, a lot of people, they have things that they owe family, friends, whatever it is, but these are obligations that you have to consider liability at one point, because whether you like to pay them or not, or sometimes, we just kind of forget about it. It's important that you calculate these. It's important that you take a piece of paper, put your liabilities on and your assets down, and use the formula I'm about to give you, because that's very critical, okay? Of course, everybody has to understand taxes. No matter what you do, if you have an asset, you sell it and you get capital gains on it, you're taxed at that capital gains amount, right? You still have that you have to worry about. You have your personal income taxes, all these type of things. And unfortunately, a lot of people, they don't think too much about taxes as much as they should. Because ultimately, if you put that back into your pocket, that increases your net worth. If you pay less taxes, increases your income, right? That means it increases your cash value, which is in turn an asset. But of course, when I hear, I'm not a tax consultant, I'm not here to talk about that. I do that at a high level with some of my mastermind students and high net worth individuals that are looking to position their assets the right way to give it to their families and help them and serve them long term. But in this general discussion, we're just calculating your net worth. So let's just focus on that. Okay. So let's look at the math. Is the math simple? And the reason we talk about that is because a lot of people give you different definitions of what a net worth should be calculated like and how it should be looked upon. So we have to look at the math to understand the proper calculation of net worth, right? So let's have a look. A lot of people will tell you, you take your assets, whatever it is, and then you subtract it, liabilities, and then you get your net worth. Now, technically, if you look at it that way, it's very simple. It's not very complicated. It's very simple. What you got to do is calculate your value of the assets minus the liability total, and then you have your net worth. That means that, it's a very simple process. But here's the truth. It's not really that simple, okay? Because you can have assets, right? You can have all the assets you want. But the cold, hard truth, okay, is that they are subject to takeover lawsuits, judgments, and legal exposure. It's just the way things work. Doesn't matter if you have free and clear assets on your personal name. The minute anybody knows out there that you have asset, particularly debt collectors, particularly creditors, particularly individuals that just want to go after you for the sake of not liking your shirt or whatever it is, and you're thinking that's funny, it's not possible. Let me tell you something. There's a statistic that happened recently, and the United States citizens were asked a couple of questions, but the first question they asked is, what's the fastest way of becoming wealthy in the United States? There were two answers that really stood out. The first was through investing, and the second was through lawsuits. The United States of America is a very litigious society, and day to day, there's more hearings, more lawsuits than ever before. As we progress on a day-to-day basis, more and more cases are being filed. So with that being a statistic and an everyday living standard, you are subject to takeover lawsuits, judgments, and or legal exposure, technically speaking, right? So in theory, calculating your net worth looks like a simple formula, but the problem is we forget about all the mechanics of preserving that wealth, right? Because you still have all those issues. We talked about the legal exposure, the judgment, the lawsuits, things that can happen that will attack your wealth, right? So that is why we have to adjust the formula, and we have to adjust it where it makes financial sense, where it makes sense to include all that legal exposure that you'll have. So the real way of looking at it, and if you want to write this down, I encourage you to do the snapshot, this very important image, and keep it with you, because when you're calculating your net worth, when you're talking to, let's say, your financial consultant or somebody who's giving you advice on certain elements, at least you will know whether or not they actually have your best interest in her. And sometimes the truth is they themselves don't even know what to look for, right? So, but this is the real way of looking at your net worth, right? So you have your net worth plus your asset protection value, which is how am I protected from all the other issues? And there's a certain value to it, right? Then you have your liabilities, and then you have also the risk of total loss, and then you'll have your net worth. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that. I'm going to give you some examples of how to calculate this exact formula, but I want you to grasp this. It's no longer your net worth minus your liabilities. Now it's your net worth and your asset protection value, because your net worth is based on your assets. And then you have your liabilities, which are your obligations, minus the risk of total loss through a lawsuit or something that happens to you, right? Then whatever's left is your net worth. And even that is being attacked on a daily basis because you still have that legal exposure, right? So that's the reality of net worth, right? So we have to look at these parameters. So assets are essentially everything that you own. Liabilities is everything that you owe. Asset protection value is the amount you retain, which is you get to keep in case of total loss. Usually it's the whole amount of the assets that you have. And then the risk of total loss is everything that you have in your asset column, your cash, your income, your properties, whatever you have. It is at risk of losing everything. So we're going to do some simple math to go over this formula a little bit more in depth so that you can start understanding, if you were to look at just The regular way of doing things, that's all they would calculate for net worth. But now that we know it's more than that, we have to calculate it the right way. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So let's look at the calculation without an asset protection value, right? Because that's essentially saying, hey, look, let's calculate this formula. Let's add some assets, some liabilities, and let's include the legal exposure, which is technically the truth because you are exposed to the legal system. So let's say you have an asset of, for metaphorical example, $1 million. Then you have debts and obligations and liabilities totaling $500,000. Of course, you don't have any asset protection value because you're just calculating your net worth right now based on the regular formula. The risk of total loss is $1 million. And the reason I say that is, like I said, we talked about risk of total loss is the equivalent amount of the assets that you have. So you can technically lose every single thing you have as an asset, right? So if we were to calculate this, right? So let's go over it together here. You have $1 million worth of assets. You have no asset protection value. Your liabilities are half $500,000, which is 500,000, and you can lose $1 million, which is the risk of total loss in case you have a lawsuit and clients start, dragging you to court and all these type of things. Not to mention legal costs involved, right? But I'm just keeping it very simple for you guys. Now, what ends up happening is you can lose technically $500,000 as your net worth because you have those liabilities. Don't forget about that. They can still come after you for that. You can owe that amount. You can have been, paying that through a job and wage garnishment or whatever it is, right? But what ends up happening is now you don't have any protection. This is the regular way of calculating net worth for a lot of people. They don't see that, but this is the technical truth. Now, let's assume that you actually added a protection value, which is an asset protection. You have your assets, same formula as before, $1 million. Your liabilities are $500,000. You actually have asset protection value of $1 million because we're trying to protect everything that you have in your asset column, which is $1 million worth, right? Now your risk of total loss is just $1 million because you have your assets and that's the equivalent of the total loss, but you're protecting that, right, one-to-one with the asset protection value. And we're going to discuss a little bit about what that is as we go on. But let's look at now something happened with this new formula with the asset protection value included here. You have your assets, which are $1 million. You have your asset protection value, which is another $1 million. Your liabilities, which is $500,000, and the risk of total loss, which is $1 million. So if you take $2 million minus $1.5 million, you're left with $500,000. Even if you were to get sued or some legal exposure happens, because of the fact that you have your asset protection value there, you would still walk away with $500,000 minus your liabilities. You see what I'm saying? So there's a huge difference with this. Most people say, well, what is asset protection value? Now, you're probably curious. Hey, how do I do this? How do I protect myself? Now, let's discuss a little bit about that because having an asset protection value is the key, not just to having your net worth, but it's the key to preserving your wealth. A lot of people don't think about that. They think about being wealthy, but they don't think about how to protect themselves. Now, unfortunately, that's a far-fetched idea for a lot of people, but you have to start thinking it at a very deep level right at this moment. It doesn't matter if you have assets or not, because if you want to grow and if you want to become wealthy one day and you're playing lottery, whatever it is that you're doing, by chance, if you win, you're going to lose all that money because now people will know. And most of the times, lottery winners don't necessarily keep to preserve their wealth because they're not educated enough, and there are, piranhas out there and parasites that are looking to leech off their money. So in a situation where you're trying to build your net worth, and hopefully you're going through my channel and understanding some of the financial concepts that I'm teaching you, you want to know how to preserve your wealth, and hopefully you're well positioned to respect what I'm about to tell you, right? So the reason why you want to preserve your wealth, because if there is a total loss, you get to mitigate that. You get to protect yourself and step out of it, right? You actually keep your assets, which is the very golden key to growing your wealth. It protects your personal interest, number one. So your family is not hurt. You're not hurt on an income level. Your assets are protected. You're not scared of the legal exposure that you have. And that's, living in fear is a very dangerous thing. Unfortunately, people do not know that they are living in a standard of exposure. And because they're ignorant about it, they don't really have that fear. But once they come to realize it, hopefully after this presentation, you will understand exactly why, okay? You'll make more conscious, financially informed decisions, right? So asset protection is really the way and the golden key to preserving your wealth. It's wealth preservation. Okay? So we're going to look at some of the simple APV adjustment. APV is meaning asset protection value adjustment. Some of the things that you can do, for example, is having life insurance. Now, I'm not a life insurance licensed expert. I don't talk about insurance as much as I should, although, I do educate individuals on it. And like I said, I just provide the information. The rest is really up to them to speak to their licensed professionals. But having life insurance to protect your families is a very important concept, because one of the two things in life are certain: debt, taxes, and the third would be certain death, right? We don't, it's a morbid thing to talk about, but we don't live forever, right? Unless you have a magic pill or something like that. Everybody's got to live to that reality, right? So you would have to calculate the value of your insurance policy based on what you owe, because debts are essentially some things like mortgages, credit card bills, even for some of the things like taxes, etc. You have to put that into your calculation. In addition to that, you would have to have some amount so that your family can retain or sustain themselves, for a good period of time, like, sometimes, 2 to 5 years or whatever it is. And that's a smart way of calculating your life insurance policy. And you can have multiple policies, nobody's stopping you. Sometimes they would actually go into your credit to verify if you can actually sustain the premium. That's why I say, guys, look at your credit. Credit is a lot of things. And one of the best things it does for you is it actually increases your net worth indirectly, right? Look at this, for example, right? Another thing you might want to do is, if you do business using your LLCs, you can protect your assets with it. If you buy some investment properties, you can use your LLCs to buy it and separate them from every other personal asset that you have. And look at certain states that offer charging order protection. Now, charging order protection, it's a lot of things. You have to understand the concept of it. The state of Wyoming is beautiful for that, but you have to talk to your legal professional about that, what it means and how you can incorporate in those jurisdictions to protect yourself, and how you can own multiple LLCs using that one particular LLC as a management company. Anyways, we talk about business strategy at a later time, but what I'm trying to give you guys heads up here is, if you do business and if you're buying assets, use an LLC to do that. That's just a structure that I personally use, and I think it works very well to keep, sharks and piranhas and parasites away from you, right? And one of the things that you absolutely have to be careful with is personally guaranteeing anything. Because a lot of people go out there, they want to help friends, family, coworkers, whoever it is, right? And they end up putting their name and signing for somebody else. But the problem there is that that particular individual may have certain financial habits that led them to not having to guarantee on their own. So you have to be consciously aware of that. And I would be very wary of doing that. Even though they're friends, family, they have, your good interests at heart. Certain things happen that, you cannot control. These are life circumstances, and you just have to be careful. So that is something that you have to worry about, and you have to be careful. You have to be very careful with that, okay? Another thing is, you can buy your different assets using your different LLCs. We talked about that. If you have different business interests, you have different assets, properties, all these type of things, consider that. And here's one thing that I have to tell you guys. If you're doing business, doesn't matter what kind of business you're in, think of getting professional liability insurance, general liability insurance, errors and omissions. Whatever the case, that's an additional policy that protects you, that covers you as a whole, that is there to give you a certain level of funds in case you need legal help. That is something that you have to think about. And it's a very powerful thing, because there are instances that people get sued and the cases drag months on end, and they're depleted of all their funds. And now what's happening is they have to liquidate their personal assets to sustain those cases. But with a professional liability insurance, what ends up happening is there's a certain amount, and the other party can essentially ask for settlement, and you can essentially go back to that and work out arrangements or whatever it is to cover yourself. So there are certain things that can be done. Like I said, I'm not a licensed insurance professional. That's something for you to go out there and explore, but I would recommend highly that you consider some of that if you're doing business at all, right? So there's really simple ways to understand it, right? It's really a question to preserve your wealth, is a question of shifting your burdens and responsibilities. That's all it is, from a personal level. So you take your personal and you transfer it into a limited liability company, right? And each of the limited liability companies would own their individual assets. So anything that happens within that peripheral, certain damages, certain lawsuits, legal exposure, it's very limited to that box. It's like you're boxing certain assets and you're putting it away. And anything that happens, it's all contained within that level, right? So what ends up happening, a lot of people every day, they end up pulling everything under one umbrella. The whole thing can be at risk if you do that. You're putting a lot of things at danger. But when you diversify, meaning you place assets in different LLCs and you keep your personal assets far away from them, you're kind of limiting that risk. You're containing it. Okay. So let me give you an example. A lot of wealthy people, what they do is they would buy, let's say, 4 multifamily properties, each with 100 units. So you have 400 units, right? But what happens is each of those properties are under individual LLCs. So you would have 4 unique LLCs, and they would keep their personal assets not affiliated with any of those. It's completely different. Just by separating and segregating those things, they're limiting the legal exposure to that, the understanding of what's going on there. So it does keep sharks, piranhas, and of course parasites away from all that, right? So that's pretty much it. And of course, I want you guys to go out there and talk to those legal professionals and insurance individuals and do your calculation of your net worth the right way. Like I said, you talk about, let's go back into that. So for your understanding, so you can actually look at how you can calculate that. You would have your assets plus your asset protection value minus your liabilities and your uh, total loss of those assets, right? So do that, and you should be more than okay to basically cover yourself, protect yourself, and hopefully build your net worth over time through the education that I provide and other things that you guys do in business on a personal level. I hope you guys found this information helpful. If you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, leave me a comment below, and what you learned today. What are some of the first steps you're going to personally take to make sure that you're protected? And don't forget to share this video with others that you feel would gain the value from this exact example of this presentation today. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so. And if this is your first time, turn that bell icon on. So every time there's a brand new video like this, you'll be first to be notified. And join my newsletter because I do email you guys regularly as financial concepts, on my lessons that I learned, some cool tools and resources for you to look at. And I look forward to speaking with you guys the next time. This is Ali Tarafdar, your financial mentor. Speak to you soon. Bye for now.